She was older, divorced, and carried herself like someone who had weathered storms, yet the night she looked at me and said, "Why go out when you're already here?" Everything changed. I hadn't been living in the apartment long. Just a week, maybe a little more. Everything still smelled new to me: cardboard boxes, fresh paint, the faint scent of wood polish lingering in the hallway. I was still figuring out which light switches connected to which outlets, still learning the rhythm of the building, the quiet hours, the creak in the stairwell, the sound of the elevator cables groaning late at night. That was when I first noticed her. She was standing in the lobby one evening, arms full of grocery bags that looked far too heavy for one person. At first glance, she didn't seem like someone who needed help. She carried herself with this graceful steadiness, a kind of composure that made you believe she could handle anything. But there was also a weariness there, hidden in her shoulders, in the way her breath caught as she adjusted the weight of the bags. I remember stepping forward before I even had time to think. "Here, let me help you with those." Her eyes met mine for the first time then, warm brown, steady, but touched with surprise. She was beautiful in a way that didn't demand attention but quietly commanded it. Her features were elegant, softened by time rather than diminished by it. She looked to be in her early 40s, maybe mid-40s, though something about her carried the presence of someone who had lived through more than she ever let on. She hesitated for half a second, then smiled, small, careful, but genuine. "Thank you. I didn't think I'd bought this much until I had to carry it all myself." The handles of the paper bags crackled as I took two from her arms. They were warm against my palms, filled with fresh produce, bread, something floral, maybe detergent or fabric softener. She led the way to the elevator, and I noticed how she moved, deliberate, measured, but with a natural grace that felt grounding. Inside the elevator there was a silence I wasn't sure how to fill. The kind that wasn't awkward, just present. She pressed a button for the 5th floor, and when I reached out to press my own, I realized it was the same. "Neighbor, then," she said with a slight curve of her lips. "I suppose that makes it easier to borrow sugar." I laughed, surprised by her lightness. "Or coffee. I always run out of coffee." The elevator dinged, and we walked down the hallway side by side. She unlocked her door, apartment 507, and I noticed the little touches outside, a small potted plant by the mat, a wind chime that caught even the faintest breeze. My door was just across from hers. 504. She turned back after placing the keys in the lock. "Thank you for helping. I'm not used to having anyone around to step in." Her words carried something heavier than they appeared. Not just politeness. More like the truth of someone who had grown accustomed to doing everything alone. I handed her the last bag and nodded. "Anytime. I'm just across the hall, remember?" She gave me that same soft smile, one that lingered longer than it needed to. For a moment neither of us moved. Her eyes searched mine, not in a bold way, but as if she was weighing whether it was safe to let herself be seen. Then she nodded lightly, almost as though answering her own silent question. "Welcome to the building." And with that, her door closed gently, leaving me standing there in the hallway with the faint trace of her perfume still drifting in the air. It was a small moment. A neighborly exchange. Nothing more, at least on the surface. But something about it stayed with me, the warmth in her voice, the careful way she let herself smile. As if, behind the everyday mask she wore, there was a story waiting to be told. And I realized then, I wanted to hear it. The hallway outside our apartments was usually quiet at night. A soft hum from the building's old lights, the occasional creak of pipes, sometimes the faint sound of a television behind closed doors. That evening, I was halfway through unpacking yet another box of kitchenware when I heard a gentle knock at my door. It wasn't rushed. Just 2 soft taps, followed by silence. I opened it to find her standing there, my neighbor from across the hall, the woman I'd helped with groceries. She was holding nothing this time, no bags weighing her down. Just herself, leaning lightly against the doorframe, a half-smile playing at her lips. "Hi," she said, her voice even, calm, yet carrying something I couldn't place. "I was just making coffee. Thought I'd ask if you'd like to join me?" Saves you from drinking instant, maybe. I blinked, caught off guard. It was late, later than you'd normally invite a neighbor in. But she said it so casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Before I could answer, she tilted her head, her smile deepening slightly. Why go out when you're already here? Something about the way she said it, light-hearted, teasing, but also undeniably inviting, shifted the air between us. I nodded slowly. Coffee sounds great. She stepped aside, gesturing me into her apartment. The first thing I noticed was how warm it felt inside, not just the temperature, but the atmosphere. The living room was softly lit, a single lamp casting a golden glow across the space. A record player in the corner hummed with low jazz, the kind of music that filled silence without demanding attention. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with something floral in the air, maybe the same perfume I'd noticed earlier. Her home was simple but thoughtfully arranged. A stack of books on the table, a blanket draped neatly across the couch, framed photographs on a shelf. It wasn't cluttered, but it wasn't bare either. It felt lived in. She moved easily through the space, barefoot, sleeves of her cardigan pushed to her elbows. Sit anywhere you like, she said, already heading toward the kitchen. I sat on the edge of the couch, taking in the details around me. There was a framed picture of her at the beach, hair windblown, smiling beside two other women who looked about her age. Friends, maybe? The kind of smile that looked freer than the careful one she'd given me earlier. When she returned, she carried 2 mugs, steam curling upward. She handed one to me, and our fingers brushed. Just a small, fleeting touch, but it lingered in my awareness longer than it should have. Careful, she said softly. It's hot. I smiled, setting it on the table for a moment. You didn't have to do this, you know. She sat across from me, curling her legs under herself on the chair. I know. But the truth is, I don't really go out much anymore. Used to, but... She paused, shrugged lightly. These days, I prefer company that doesn't require a reservation. There was something unguarded in the way she said it. Not sad, exactly, but tinged with honesty. We talked about nothing at first, the building, how temperamental the elevator could be, which grocery store nearby had better prices. But underneath the small talk was an ease I hadn't expected. Every now and then, silence stretched between us. And yet, it didn't feel like silence that needed filling. Her eyes would meet mine, steady and thoughtful, and I'd feel a weight behind them. Not heavy, but deliberate. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear while she listened, a simple movement, but my attention caught on it, the way her hand lingered near her cheek, the softness in the gesture. It wasn't a date. It wasn't anything official. Just 2 neighbors sharing coffee in the quiet of the evening. And yet, there was something in the air that felt different. As if the line between strangers and something more had already begun to blur. The coffee was warm, rich, smoother than what I was used to making for myself. She had poured it into heavy ceramic mugs, the kind that felt solid in your hands. A small thing, but it gave the moment weight, as if it were meant to last. We sat across from each other, the lamp beside her chair throwing a soft, golden light over her face. It softened her features, bringing out the warmth in her eyes, the slight curve of her lips. For the first time, I noticed how calm her presence made the room feel, as though her very being had its own rhythm that steadied everything around her. Conversation began with the easy subjects, the quirks of the building, the way the hallway light outside our doors always flickered, the sound of the wind chimes she had hung by her door. But as minutes slipped by, the walls between us, those invisible, polite boundaries of 2 people who barely knew each other, began to thin. She asked me about my work, about what had brought me to the city. I explained, stumbling a little over the uncertainty of my own life. I admitted I hadn't quite figured things out yet, that I was in that stage of trying, failing, and trying again, unsure of where it would all lead. Her smile was knowing, but not condescending. That's the best stage, she said gently, sipping her coffee. It feels endless now, but you'll miss it when you're older. The freedom of not having all the answers yet. There was something about the way she said older, not as a distant thing, but as something she already carried with her, shaped by her own experiences. When I asked her what she did, she was quiet for a beat before answering. I teach part-time. Literature. I used to do more, but life shifted. She gave a little shrug, then added almost as an afterthought. Divorce will do that. The word hung in the air, not heavy, but honest. She didn't flinch when she said it. She looked directly at me, as though waiting to see if I would. I didn't. Instead, I asked softly, How long? 3 years, she replied. Long enough for people to stop asking if I'm okay. Not long enough to stop asking myself. Her laugh that followed was quiet, self-aware. I found myself leaning forward, elbows resting on my knees, listening more closely than I'd planned to. She went on to share little pieces of her past, how she had once loved hosting dinners, how the kitchen had been her favorite place until it started feeling too empty. She spoke of the silence that followed arguments, of the strange loneliness of being in the same room with someone and feeling utterly unseen. But then she brightened, telling me about her love for books, the joy of teaching students who still found magic in words, the way a good story could hold you the way a person couldn't. I found myself laughing with her at certain moments, at the way she described her cat as her most judgmental roommate, at her exaggerated impression of her building's cranky landlord. The laughter came easily, bubbling up between sips of coffee, loosening something in the air. At one point, our knees brushed beneath the low table. Just lightly, an accidental touch. But neither of us moved away. The contact was small, almost insignificant, yet it carried the warmth of acknowledgement. Like a quiet yes, neither of us spoke aloud. Her gaze lingered on mine longer after that. Not with boldness, but with a thoughtful weight, as though she were considering something she hadn't allowed herself to in a long time. And there I was, a little younger, uncertain about where I was going in life. Yet, in that moment, sitting across from her, I felt strangely steady. As if her presence anchored me, even while stirring something inside I didn't fully understand. The coffee cooled. The jazz record ended. But the conversation, the way it wrapped around us, unhurried, tender, filled with laughter and the faint ache of things left unsaid, felt like it was only just beginning. The room had grown quieter. The jazz record had finished playing, leaving only the faint patter of rain against the windows. Our mug sat half empty on the table between us, forgotten in the weight of the conversation. She leaned back in her chair, pulling the blanket a little tighter around her shoulders, though the apartment wasn't cold. Her gaze drifted toward the window, the reflection of the lamplight soft against the glass. I don't usually do this, she said finally, her voice low, careful. Do what? I asked. She gave a small shake of her head, smiling faintly, but it wasn't a smile meant for amusement. More like one she wore to soften the truth. Invite people in. Especially men. Especially neighbors. Her eyes flicked to mine briefly, then back to the window. I stayed quiet, sensing she wasn't finished. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders rising and falling as though she were pushing against a weight she carried alone. After my divorce, I got used to being invisible. It's strange, really. You spend years being someone's wife, someone's other half, and then suddenly you're just... She stopped, searching for the word. Untethered. People look at you differently. Or sometimes they stop looking at all. Her fingers traced the rim of her mug absent-mindedly, circling it over and over, as if grounding herself in the motion. It's not that I'm unhappy. Not exactly. But... She hesitated, her voice softer now. I miss being seen. Not as a mother, not as a colleague, not as someone who used to belong to somebody else. Just as me. Her words settled between us, heavy yet fragile. She didn't meet my eyes, as though afraid of what she might find there, pity, discomfort, judgment. But I felt none of those things. Only a quiet ache in my chest at the honesty of her confession. I see you, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I had the chance to second-guess them. Her head turned then, slowly, her eyes finding mine. There was a vulnerability there I hadn't seen before, a raw openness that seemed almost foreign to her. As if she hadn't allowed herself to be exposed in a long time. She studied me, searching for something. Maybe sincerity. Maybe reassurance that I wasn't just saying it to fill the silence. Her lips parted slightly, as though she might speak, but then she let out a quiet laugh instead. It wasn't mocking, more like disbelief, or maybe relief. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I mean it." The room felt different after that. Heavier, but not uncomfortable. Charged, almost, with something unnamed. Her hand rested on the arm of her chair, fingers curling slightly as though she were holding herself together. I noticed the faint tremor in them before she tucked her hands beneath the blanket, hiding the movement. For a long moment, we sat like that, her watching me watching her. The rain outside seemed to fall harder, filling the silence with its steady rhythm. Finally, she shook her head lightly, almost as if scolding herself. "I didn't mean to say all that. You came over for coffee, not this." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I don't mind. In fact, I'm glad you did." She blinked, surprised by the steadiness of my tone. Then she smiled, soft, uncertain but real. The kind of smile that carried gratitude, even if she couldn't say the words aloud. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't the start of some sweeping romance. It was smaller than that, more delicate. A moment of trust. A moment where her guard slipped, and she let me glimpse the woman behind the composed exterior. And for me, that was more powerful than anything else could have been. The storm outside had settled into a steady rhythm, rain tapping gently against the windows like a soft percussion. The sky beyond the glass was dark, heavy with clouds, and the occasional distant rumble of thunder seemed to remind us that the night wasn't ready to let me leave just yet. She glanced at the window, then back at me. "You might want to wait it out. That rain looks like it's not stopping anytime soon." I nodded, half grateful for the excuse. "I don't mind." She rose from her chair then, pulling the blanket from around her shoulders and walking toward the couch. With a casual gesture, she spread it across the cushions, then sat down, patting the space beside her. "Come on," she said softly. "It's warmer over here." I hesitated for only a moment before standing and crossing the small room. The couch was wide but not expansive. Sitting beside her meant being close, closer than before. When I lowered myself onto the cushion, the blanket shifted, and she adjusted it, pulling it gently across my lap so that it covered us both. The gesture was simple. Neighborly, even. Yet the intimacy of it sank into me. The soft fabric brushing against my arm, the faint warmth of her body beside mine, the quiet sound of her breathing. Suddenly the room felt smaller, more contained. We sat like that for a while, listening to the rain. There was no rush to fill the silence. The kind of quiet that lingered between us wasn't empty. It was alive, humming with unspoken understanding. Her shoulder brushed lightly against mine when she shifted to get more comfortable. It wasn't deliberate, but she didn't move away. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, steady and grounding, and I found myself relaxing into it. After a few moments, she spoke again, her voice softer than before. "It's funny. The house used to feel too big, too empty. And now, sitting here like this, it doesn't feel that way." I turned slightly toward her. "I'm glad I could change that. Even if just for tonight." Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, thoughtful. Then she smiled, small but genuine. "You really are different, you know that?" I raised a brow, half amused. "Different how?" She shrugged, looking away again, her fingers fiddling with the edge of the blanket. "Most people, they see me as what I've been. A divorcee. Someone who's already lived her story. You look at me like there's still more to tell." Her words settled in me, heavy and warm. I didn't know how to answer right away, so I didn't. Instead, I let the closeness between us speak. Another roll of thunder echoed, closer this time, and she instinctively leaned just a little nearer, her arm brushing mine again. I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, mingling with the scent of coffee and rain. I found myself wanting to say something, anything that might match the weight of the moment. But before I could, she let out a soft laugh, almost self-conscious. Listen to me. I don't know why I'm saying all this. Maybe because you finally can, I offered gently. Her gaze returned to mine, steady and unflinching now. And for a long moment, we simply held each other's eyes. The rain filled the space around us, the blanket held us together, and the air felt thick with something unnamed. Our hands rested side by side on the fabric, so close that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, though we didn't touch. It was such a small thing, that distance of an inch or two. But in that moment it felt like the most significant space in the world, one that might close at any second, or remain as it was, charged and waiting. And though either of us crossed it just yet, we both knew the closeness had already shifted something between us. The storm outside had deepened into something steadier, a curtain of rain that seemed determined to keep the world at bay. Inside her apartment, though, it was quiet, just the muted sound of water against glass, the occasional flicker of lamplight, and the soft rhythm of her breathing beside me. We had settled deeper into the couch, the blanket a shared weight across our laps. For a long time, neither of us spoke. There was nothing pressing to say. The silence felt alive, charged in a way that made every small movement noticeable. The way she shifted slightly to rest more comfortably, the brush of her arm against mine, the faint catch of her breath when she laughed softly at some stray thought. Then, without seeming to think about it, her hand moved closer across the blanket. At first, it looked unintentional, her fingers resting idly near mine. But then they stilled, just a hair's breadth away. I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, and the nearness pulled at me in a way that felt both exhilarating and fragile. Finally, her fingers brushed against the back of my hand. Just the lightest touch, like a question she wasn't sure she should ask. I didn't move at first. I let the moment hang there, heavy with possibility. Then, slowly, I turned my palm upward, giving her the choice. She hesitated only a second before letting her hand settle into mine. The contact was simple, ordinary. But it carried the weight of something much larger: trust, vulnerability, an unspoken acknowledgement of everything she had confessed earlier. Her hand was warm, steady, though I could feel the faintest tremor in her fingers as they curled gently around mine. We didn't look at each other right away. Instead, we sat in that quiet, hand in hand, as though the world had shifted a fraction of an inch closer. After a moment, I glanced at her. She was watching me carefully, her expression unreadable at first, part hesitation, part curiosity, part something deeper that she didn't yet want to name. Her hair had slipped across her cheek, and before I could think twice, I reached up with my free hand to brush it back. My fingertips grazed her skin, feather-light. She drew in a quiet breath but didn't pull away. My hand lingered longer than it should have, cupping her cheek for a moment. Her skin was warm beneath my touch, her eyes steady on mine, as though she were searching for something in my face: reassurance, permission, maybe both. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she exhaled slowly, and I felt her lean the smallest fraction into my touch. It would have been so easy to close the distance between us then. To lean forward, to press my mouth to hers, to let the storm outside fade into nothing. The moment was heavy with that possibility, every heartbeat, every breath, every glance hovering on the edge of something more. But neither of us moved. Instead, we stayed suspended in that almost. Our hands clasped beneath the blanket, her cheek beneath my palm, her gaze locked on mine. The restraint wasn't frustrating, it was powerful. It was as if both of us knew that what we were building was fragile, and rushing would only break it. She smiled then, just faintly, her eyes softening. "You're very patient," she whispered. I smiled back. "Only because you're worth it." Her laugh was quiet, disbelieving but touched with something tender. She let her head tilt just slightly, resting against my shoulder, the weight of her presence grounding me. We stayed like that, close, hand in hand, her head against me, the rain a steady chorus outside. No kiss, no grand gesture. Just a quiet crossing of boundaries, tender and deliberate, enough to say without words, "This is different. This matters." By the time the storm began to ease, The apartment had grown impossibly still. The rain had softened to a misting sound, the thunder nothing more than a distant murmur. The world outside was catching its breath, and inside, so were we. She was still resting her head against my shoulder, her hand curled into mine beneath the blanket. I hadn't moved, afraid that breaking the moment would send us back into the safety of distance. And yet the stillness between us no longer felt uncertain. It felt chosen. She shifted slightly, enough that I could see her profile in the dim light. Her eyes were half closed, thoughtful, like she was somewhere between memory and decision. Finally she spoke, quiet, hesitant, but steady. "You make me forget," she said. "Forget that I'm supposed to be careful. That I'm supposed to be older, wiser, more guarded." Her words lingered, carrying both confession and fear. I squeezed her hand gently, grounding her. "Maybe forgetting isn't such a bad thing," I said softly. She turned then, her eyes searching mine. In that look, I saw everything she'd been holding back: doubt, longing, hesitation, but also something new. A willingness to trust. A willingness to let go, if only a little. I lifted her hand to my lips, brushing the back of it with the faintest kiss. She inhaled sharply, not because it was bold, but because it was tender in a way that asked nothing of her except honesty. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You're dangerous," she whispered, though her voice held no real warning. "Why?" I asked, my voice low. "Because you make me want to believe in something again." For a long moment, we sat in that admission. The storm outside had broken, but here we were, in the afterglow of something just as powerful. Her hand slipped from mine only so she could cup my face, her palm warm against my cheek. The gesture startled me, not because it was unexpected, but because of how deliberate it was. Her thumb brushed lightly across my skin, and I leaned into her touch instinctively. It wasn't rushed, wasn't fiery. When she finally closed the distance and pressed her lips to mine, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Gentle, searching, the kind of kiss that carried no promises yet spoke volumes. When she pulled back, there was no guilt in her expression. Just quiet acceptance. Her forehead rested against mine as she whispered, "I don't know where this goes. I don't have answers for what happens next." I smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's okay. We don't need answers tonight." She let out a soft laugh, the sound colored with relief. Then she tucked herself closer, her head resting against my chest as though the decision, for now, was enough. The hours slipped by unnoticed. We stayed wrapped in the quiet hum of the room, the soft glow of the lamp, and the comfort of each other's presence. Nothing extravagant. Just two people who had dared to let a boundary dissolve, even if only gently, even if only for now. And maybe that was the point. That love, or whatever this was becoming, didn't always need to arrive with certainty. Sometimes it began in the quiet moments, a hand held, a laugh shared, a storm weathered together. When she finally looked up at me again, her voice was lighter, freer. "You know," she said with a small smile, "I was right." "About what?" I asked. Her eyes softened, her thumb brushing once more over my skin. "Why go out, when you're already here?" I couldn't help but laugh softly, pressing another kiss to her hair. And in that moment, with the storm gone and the air washed clean, it felt like the truest answer in the world. 23L